Hey yo, the topic of this video is going to be about romance. Yeah, the topic of this video is going to be about romance. This is such an interesting topic and stuff like that. The topic of this video is going to be about romance and stuff like that. It's such an interesting topic to think about this topic and stuff like that, romance. Ah, shoot, man. Gotta get into the right positions. The topic of this video is going to be about romance. The topic of this video is going to be about our romance and etc. and stuff like that. Such an interesting topic. Such an interesting topic of romance. First of all, what is romance? What is romance? It's kind of like dubious. It's very difficult to properly define this type of word and terminology. What is romance? What is romance? Romance. It's so interesting to think about it. Like, obviously there's like Oxford Dictionary definitions, but to put it into my own words, and again, you know me, I like putting things into my own words. Romance is basically like this type of concept of like some type of attraction between two people. Romance is like this type of concept, like where two people are like super attracted to each other and stuff, and they have like these deep feelings and emotions for each other, and they, I don't know. Romance, it sort of is like basically like two people, they like each other a lot. Basically, that's what romance is about. The reason I'm making this video on romance is because it's like so interesting to me that like romance, like for like ever since like us human beings, we began to like create poetry and create stories and do like complex forms of art, we always were like kind of like talking about a little bit about romance and etc. And it's so interesting. Romance is so like this the topic of this video is like so interesting because the topic of this video is going to be about like a romance. Romance is like such a complex topic to talk about. But again, what does this word mean, romance? What does that word mean, romance? Romance is basically like when two people, not just two people, two like sentient creatures feel like very strongly towards each other. Two sentient creatures feel very strongly towards each other, and they have like these sentimental feelings and etc. and emotions, and that's what romance sort of the word romance, they sort of just describe like when two sentient creatures feel very like sentimental about each other and stuff, and they have these strong feelings of attachment and like sentiments and etc. and like feelings. That's what romance sort of does mean. It's kind of dubious a little bit. It's kind of dubious a little bit what romance means. It's kind of a little bit dubious. Obviously, you can go into Google and you can look up the more academic dictionary, Oxford, the more academic dictionary definitions. What does romance mean? It's kind of like it's kind of a little bit dubious. Basically, romance is like when two sentient creatures feel very strongly towards each other. Two sentient creatures feel very strongly towards each other, etc. stuff. The two like sentient creatures, not just sentient creatures, but you're like two conscious beings, because I do believe that some other animal, like I don't believe it's just only us human beings, as an animal species, us human beings, we're like the only type of creature that can feel like romance, that can experience romance and etc. I do believe other types of animals, specifically like dolphins, other animals are a little bit more intelligent, like dolphins, maybe elephants and etc., can have like these types of feelings of romance and love and etc. and stuff like that. But anyway, back to the topic of this video, romance, because this is such an interesting, important topic, because romance has like really been like a theme for so many different types of stories and genres of different types of things in poetry and art and etc. Romance has definitely been like romance has been like so romance is like kind of been like the main theme of like so many different types of stories and forms of art and movies and etc. and stuff. Romance is like so like such an interesting topic to talk about. But in my opinion, again, like what does the word romance mean? Romance basically is like when two sentient creatures have these types of feelings of sentiments and attachment towards each other and stuff, and have like these positive emotions and feelings and etc. and stuff, and feel very strongly towards each other. That's what like romance means. Obviously, it's a little bit it is a little bit dubious. Well, again, what does the word romance actually mean? It's kind of a little bit dubious. etc. and stuff. It's like very difficult to properly put it in a nutshell, but in a nutshell, romance is like when two sentient creatures are feeling very strongly towards each other and have these feelings of sentiments and attachment towards each other and etc. and stuff. Romance is like such an interesting topic, the topic of romance and etc. and stuff, and love and emotions. It's so interesting to talk about this and to think about this, because again, if you look throughout our human history and etc. and stuff, you'd kind of notice like how romance has been like kind of like the theme of like so many different like forms of art in our history regarding like I don't know, if you look at the Mughal Empire, do you know the Taj Mahal? If you analyze the Mughal Empire and you study like kind of like the creation of the Taj Mahal and etc. and stuff, the Taj Mahal, the reason the Taj Mahal was made was because of like the fact that, you know, one of the Mughal emperors, Shah Jahan, etc. and stuff like that, he had like his wife Mumtaz Mahal or something similar to Mumtaz. I don't know all the technical details, but basically the Taj Mahal was created by Shah Jahan to kind of like to honor his like wife, to honor like one of his like his wife, like Shah Jahan. He like created like this entirely like sophisticated architecture and like building just to honor his wife. That's so interesting, isn't it? If you look at our history and etc. and stuff like that, if you look at our history and etc. and stuff, it's kind of interesting. It's very interesting that if you look at our history, like a lot of our history does kind of revolve around romance, etc. and stuff like that. I know, like if you look at the Ottoman Empire, and obviously if you know anything about the Ottoman Empire, you know about someone called Suleiman the Magnificent and someone called Roxolana. And Suleiman the Magnificent basically was like a very high-ranking Ottoman sultan. He was like a leader of the Ottoman Empire, etc. and stuff like that. He was like a high-ranking a person in the Ottoman Empire and etc. and he was like kind of like at the top of that type of society and etc. and he had like, if you know anything about the Ottoman Empire, you know about someone called Suleiman the Magnificent, and he had like a concubine called Roxolana. You should know about Roxolana, you should know about Suleiman the Magnificent. If you have any like type of understanding of the Ottoman Empire, you should know about these names that I'm talking about and people that I'm talking about anyway. But it's so interesting because if you look at our history, it does kind of revolve around romance. And you know, Suleiman the Magnificent, Roxolana, there's been so many different types of stories, movies, different types of adaptations of their romance made and etc. and stuff. But anyway, back to the topic of this video, romance. What does the word romance mean? Let's talk about etymology. What does romance mean? It's basically, obviously there's like Oxford dictionary definitions and etc. and stuff. If you like kind of, if you analyze the word romance, it's sort of kind of, it relates to like this type of concept of like attachment and sentiments and feelings and emotions and etc. between two sentient creatures, etc. and stuff. It does kind of relates to like these types of concepts and like understandings and ideas of like romance and attachment. Romance basically just kind of describes like a type of like attachment. It's kind of very difficult, like these like strong feelings of like attachment towards someone or something. That's what sort of like romance is about. Attachment like in a positive, sentimental way, not in like a creepy, possessive way, but maybe pressed out as well. Romance kind of, it's very difficult to like in a nutshell to describe what the word romance means. Obviously you can go into like Google and you can find the Oxford Dictionary definition. But again, to put it into my own words, romance is like when two sentient creatures feel very sentimental about each other. Anyway, I don't want to keep like dwelling on like dictionary definitions anyway, but why am I even talking about romance? What's the point of this video? Because I do believe that as human beings, a lot of us, we have like very corrupted, like wrong, bad understandings of romance. A lot of us human beings, we have like these horrible understandings of romance and etc. and stuff. We don't properly even understand what romance actually means. We have like all these horrible understandings of romance and etc. and stuff. And I do believe it's because of like Hollywood and movies and cartoons and media and etc. and stuff. That's why a lot of us human beings, we have like these horrible understandings of like romance. Like a lot of us, we don't really know what romance actually means. A lot of us, we believe that romance is when like a woman and a man come together and they feel very strongly towards each other and they have like a happy family and happily ever after and etc. and stuff. And I do believe that is like a little bit about what romance is. But I do believe that romance, it kind of is I do believe there's like, in regards to like romance, love, and etc. These types of concepts and ideas. I do believe they're kind of a little bit delusional, because I do believe that like romance is kind of a little bit delusional. I do believe that even if you feel very strongly towards someone, these types of like these types of feelings and emotions are very animalistic and primal and primitive, and they're like very like primitive and primal and animalistic. And after a while, these feelings start to disappear, and you start to like lose any type of attraction you have towards someone. Obviously, not always. Sometimes like some people like they're very happy together and they stay together for like until they die. Sometimes that is the case, but there's also like a lot of cases where like some people they feel like two, like usually man and woman, or man and man, or if you're a queer or something, I don't know, but man and man, like man and woman, like sometimes, like I know I do understand like some marriages last a long time, but like there's also like divorces and etc., which is kind of very interesting to think about. Like two people, they feel very strongly towards each other, they have this type of attraction, and then over time they lose these types of feelings of attraction and attachment and sentiments, and they just kind of like go their separate ways, and basically they experience a divorce if they get married, etc. and stuff. You should know about what I'm talking about. Like married people, like someone, like look at the divorce statistics, especially in the United States, especially in the USA and etc. and stuff. The statistics of divorce and etc. Two people come together and etc. and stuff, and they have like these strong feelings of attachment and sentiments and whatever, and then inevitably over time, maybe perhaps they get married, but inevitably over time they start to like kind of like lose this type of attraction towards each other, and then they kind of go like their own separate ways. They kind of like inevitably sometimes they get divorced and etc. and they go their separate ways, which is kind of very interesting. It's not very interesting, I don't know. It is like very interesting, I don't know. It's so interesting. If you look at like especially human history, romance has human history does kind of like revolve around romance and etc. and stuff like that. It's so interesting. If you look at human history, our history does kind of revolve around romance and etc. and stuff like that. It's kind of interesting. It's like, again, like look at the Mughal Empire, the Taj Mahal. It's like kind of like this type of piece of architecture in India. It was created to honor like one of the Mughals emperors like wives, etc. and stuff. Especially the Greeks and the Romans, they had like a lot of their poetry was about like romance and etc. A lot of their, like, if you look at the Greeks and the Romans, a lot of their poetry was like about romance as well and etc. and stuff. A lot of their poetry was like about romance, the Greeks and the Romans, and not just them. So many different types of civilizations and people create like they would typically like create like poetry and etc. Create poetry, etc. and stuff like that. About romance, etc. and stuff, and they would write literature and stories about romance, etc. and stuff, which is kind of interesting. It's kind of very interesting. Romance has been like so like important in our history anyway, but I do believe that because like specifically like Hollywood and stuff like that, and Disney movies and cartoons, a lot of us human beings, we have like the wrong like understandings, wrong ideas about like what romance actually means. What does romance even mean? We have like the wrong understandings, like these types of like corrupted ideas and understandings of like what romance actually means. Which is kind of like interesting. Yeah, what is romance? It's like when two sentient creatures feel very sentimental about each other and have like these strong feelings of attachment. But other than that, I do believe that romance is completely like, I do believe it's like so delusional to some extent. I do believe in love and romance to some extent, but I do believe romance is kind of like delusional a little bit, because I understand like two people, they have like these strong feelings of like attachment. They feel like very sentimental towards each other, and there are like cases where like sometimes like romance is like very real, and people are like they're so like they feel like very attracted to each other and they stay together for a long time. But usually there's also like cases of divorce and breakups, and that is like far more common. I do believe that divorces and like breakups are far more common than like people staying together for a long time. You got to look at like the divorce statistics. It's so interesting to me, because I do believe romance, love, is like such a primal, primitive instinct. It's like a very animalistic, it's so animalistic, these types of like concepts and feelings and emotions of like romance and love. It's like all these like feelings and emotions are very animalistic and primal and primitive. all these feelings and emotions are typically very primitive and primal. These feelings and emotions are like very primitive and primal. And typically, like usually these feelings and emotions tend to like disappear after a while. Look at like the divorce statistics in so many different types of countries. It's so interesting. Why do people get divorced? Why do breakups happen? People like they find like like, think about it, divorce, before a divorce happens, people are married and they're staying together, and initially there was like some type of attraction between these people that inevitably got divorced. But why is it that they got divorced and they went their separate ways, and they start to like hate, they start to like feel like this type of like disgust inevitably, instead of like romance and attraction, they start to feel disgust and like hatred towards each other. Why? That's why I do believe that romance and love, these types of concepts of romance and love, they're kind of like delusional and fantasy. They're kind of delusional and a little bit like, not like even like true. It's all about like fantasy and delusions. I do believe that like romance, especially like I do believe that romance and love, these types of concepts of romance and love are kind of a little bit delusional, a little bit like this fantasy basically. I do believe that. To some extent, I do believe sometimes when two people, they feel very strongly attracted to each other, and they inevitably they get together and they get married and they live happily ever after. But I do believe that's like very like that's like a small percentage of people that this happens to. I believe in a lot of cases, people they initially feel very attracted to each other. They initially have these feelings of romance and love, and they maybe perhaps get married, but over time these feelings disappear and they inevitably get divorced. And I believe that's far more common than this type of like fairy tale, Disney tale story, like bullshit, like idea of like happily ever after, like Romeo and Juliet or something similar. Like two people love each other and they live and they get together and they get married and they live happily ever after. I believe this is like so like this isn't like, this is like kind of like this is like only like describes like a small percentage of people. I believe like what's far more common is like divorce, etc. and stuff like that. Divorce and like breakups and etc. I think that's far more common. Happily ever after, all that is kind of like just bullshit. I believe that's like happily ever after and all that type of stuff is kind of just bullshit. I believe divorce is like far more common, etc. and stuff like that. Yeah, divorce, breakups, all that type of stuff, I think that's far more common. And then like two people get together, they get married happily ever after. I think that's like just that describes only a small percentage of people. It's kind of interesting to me. I don't know why why has like if you look at human history very carefully, it is like a lot of our history does revolve around romance, like these types of romantic relationships and interactions between specifically like emperors and maybe specific people and important politicians. Romance is like so interesting, such an interesting so interesting to think about it, because if you look at our history just kind of a little bit, it does revolve around romance. These types of like even like regarding like monarchies, these types of like important strategic like marriages between specific people and like their like feelings of attraction and maybe resent and hatred. Sometimes like I do believe that sometimes some monarchs, they inevitably hated each other and they broke up and etc. But anyway, back to the topic of this video, romance. Romance is so interesting. This topic is so interesting to think about. If you think about this topic carefully, romance, you would understand that a lot of like our understandings of like romance is kind of like bullshit. I do believe romance and love it's sort of like a little bit bullshit. I do believe that like there is such a thing as like people, they feel strongly towards each other and they get together and they live happily ever after. I do believe that to some extent, but in a lot of cases people they initially feel very attracted and sentimental about each other, but over time they start to like get hatred and like resentful, and inevitably divorce happens and breakups happen, etc. I think that's far more common, and I do blame Disney for this and Hollywood for like kind of corrupting our like understandings of romance and love. In my opinion, romance and love, these are like very primitive like conceptions. These are like all of these like feelings of like love and romance. I think it's like very primitive. I think it does kind of relate to like a very primal part of our brain. It's like you know, like you watch Rick and Morty. I remember Rick and Morty. I remember like Rick, he said something about like, you know, like love is just a chemical reaction that compels animals to breed. I do believe in that to such a massive extent. Love is just a chemical reaction that compels animals to breed. I believe in that to such a massive extent. Anyway, take one complete. Take two. All right, so romance. One of the things, like, I do remember Rick and Morty, so cringy I'm talking about Rick and Morty. It's kind of cringy that I'm talking about Rick and Morty, but if you ever watched Rick and Morty, you should know what I'm talking about. Rick and Morty, perhaps maybe you don't, maybe you're like kind of a little bit ignorant as to what this is. What is Rick and Morty? It's like a cartoon show basically about like some type of intellectual scientist guy, old scientist geezer, and he has like a little grandson, and they go on adventures and etc and stuff, and he's super smart, and he says basically, this old geezer scientist cartoon guy says that love is just a chemical reaction that compels animals to breed. And I do believe that I do believe in that to such a massive extent. Regarding like romance and love, I do believe these like romance and love, these like feelings of like romance and love, and all these emotions and sentiments and attachment, all these things are like ultimately, all these things are like derived from like a very primitive part of our brain, a part of our brain that's like, that relates to like reproduction and like the like breeding with like facilitating like our offspring, etc and stuff, like these very like primitive like evolutionary like mechanisms for like reproduction. And that's like what romance, I do believe that's like where romance and love comes from. It comes from like these very primal, primitive parts of our brain, very primitive, primal parts of our brain that relate to basically like that relate to like these types of evolutionary mechanisms for reproduction and survival of the fittest and etc and stuff like that, and survival and whatever. Fucking hell, man. You know, and you know, if you want to record and do vlogging videos outside, it's so difficult, man. I fucking swear. Especially in England, man. Fucking hell. Because people sometimes can come, I feel like someone's gonna come and jack my shit up anyway. But if you like, yeah, again, like feelings of like romance stuff, I do believe all of this kind of does relate to like a very primitive part of our brain. Again, Rick and Morty, love Rick and Morty. If you know anything about like Rick and Morty, you know about like this type of quote by Rick. He's like this like old geezer scientist guy. He's like a cartoon guy. He says, a love and romance is basically, love is just a chemical reaction that compels animals to breed. I believe in that to such a massive extent. I do believe that's what, you know, all these feelings and sentiments and attachments and stuff like that, romance, all these like feelings of like romance and love, all that type of stuff, I do believe it like relates to like such a primitive, like primal part of our brain. I do believe it like relates to like such a primitive, primal part of our brain. Such a primitive, primal part of our brain, and etc. These like feelings of like romance and love and etc and whatever. I do believe it like kind of relates to like such a primitive, like primal part of our brain. I do believe in that to such a massive extent. Like it does like relate to like such a primitive, like primal part of our brain. Like these feelings of like romance and love and etc and stuff like that. Just like what Rick said, that old scientist geezer cartoon guy. He said that love is basically a chemical reaction that compels animals to breed. That's what love is. I believe in that to such a massive extent. To such a massive extent. Love basically, love and romance is sort of just like chemicals in the human brain, etc. And like these feelings of like romance and attachment and sentiments. You have to understand these feelings and emotions. It all kind of just relate to like a very primitive part of our brain. I know, oh, this guy, are you like some type of edgy fucking emo guy? Not emo, but like, are you like some type of edgy pseudo-intellectual dipshit that's trying to to corrupt like all these like beautiful like understandings and ideas of romance and love? Are you just gonna like kind of like be like an edgy wannabe intellectual dipshit retard guy? I don't know. I'm not trying like to say that there is no such thing as like romance and love. Obviously I do believe in that. I believe there is like such a thing as like romance and love and whatever, to some extent, but to a massive extent I believe that romance and love, these feelings of like romance and love, is really just like a primitive like part of our brain. I believe it's just like, it relates to like such a primitive part of our brain. I believe that romance, it really does like, it does relate to like such a primitive like part of our brain. Oh fucking hell, I love being outside, man. The fresh air, man. Shit, sometimes the people can be kind of a little bit difficult, but romance. Anyway, the topic of this video is romance, man. Romance, I'm not saying that there's no such thing as romance and love. I do believe that some people, sometimes they feel very strongly towards each other, etc. Not just people, other sentient creatures, because, you know, it's not just only us human beings as an animal species. I do believe dolphins, elephants, chimps, perhaps, all these other, like, sort of decently intelligent animal species, they can also have these feelings of romance and love. But anyway, but back to to us human beings anyway, romance and love, I do believe these types of feelings and, like, of romance and love, it does kind of relate to like such a primitive part of our brain. Such a primitive part of our brain. It relates to like such a primitive part of our brain. I do believe so. Like these feelings of romance and love, etc. and stuff. I believe it's just like what that scientist, old geezer guy, cartoon Rick guy, just like what Rick said. Love is a chemical reaction. Love is just a chemical reaction that compels animals to breed. That is, I know you're gonna like be a little bit iffy about that, but I do believe in that to some extent. Like love basically is just like a chemical reaction that compels animals to breed and etc. and stuff. And basically it's just like it's like a very primitive, primal, like evolutionary mechanism to facilitate reproduction. I do believe that's like where the origin of love and romance is. If we want to be very scientific, I do believe that love and romance, these feelings of like attachment and attraction and sentiments, I do believe it is basically just like a very it just like relates to like a very primitive, primal part of our brain. Essentially it's like just about like is this like love and romance is just like an evolutionary mechanism for reproduction and to facilitate reproduction and like to incentivize us human beings to like make babies, etc. I do believe in that to some extent. Love and romance, I do actually. I'm not, because so many people, they like, because if you look at human history, a lot of our history does revolve around like romance to some extent. If you look at like the Greeks and the Romans, they used to write poetry about like about love and etc. Not just them, the Mughals, the Ottoman Empire. Look at like Suleiman the Magnificent again in Roxolana, like so many like adaptations of their romancing and etc. and stuff. I believe that, like, I do believe that love, but still, if we want to be very scientific, love and romance, these feelings of like attachment and sentiments and etc. and stuff, it relates to like such a primitive like part of our brain. It relates to like such a primitive like part of our brain. These feelings of like love and attraction and sentiments and etc. and stuff. It relates to like such a primitive like part of our brain. I do believe in that to such a massive extent. I do believe in that to such a massive extent. The love and like romance and etc. and stuff like that. It just like relate to like such a primitive like primal part of our brain. Again, Rick and Morty, Rick, he said that love is just a chemical reaction that compels animals to breed. I do believe in that to some extent. If we want to be very scientific, like what is the origin of love and romance and etc. It is like the origin of love and romance is basically if you look at like it's like love and romance is just an evolutionary. It basically is just like an evolutionary mechanism to facilitate reproduction. Isn't that what love and romance is? It sort of is like that. It sort of is that, right? Love and romance basically is just an evolutionary mechanism to facilitate reproduction. I do believe in that to such a massive extent. That love and romance is just a chemical reaction, just like what that old scientist geezer guy said. Rick and Morty. You gotta watch that cartoon show, man. I'm telling you. Rick and Morty. Rick, he said that love is just a chemical reaction that compels animals to breed. I believe in that to such a massive extent. All of it kind of is related like to such a primitive like part of our brain. Such a primitive primal part of our brain. Love and romance, it's so primitive and primal, etc. in origin. If we want to be very scientific, it just kind of is, it sort of is just like an evolutionary mechanism that help facilitate reproduction. That is what love and romance is, like these strong feelings of attachment and sentiments. Feelings of attachment, sentiments, attraction, attachment, all these feelings and emotions, all of it comes from like this very primal part of our brain. Basically, this part of our brain that's about like reproduction and survival and etc. from our caveman ancestors, etc. and stuff. Romance. I'm not saying that romance doesn't exist. I'm not saying it's just all like chemicals in the brain, but it is to such a massive extent. I do believe it is just like chemicals in the brain. It's basically just chemicals in the brain. Basically, it's just like it's an evolutionary mechanism to help facilitate reproduction. I do believe that. I do believe in like that old scientist guy, Rick and Morty, that scientist guy geezer, Rick. He said love is just a chemical reaction that compels animals to breed. I do believe that to some extent, because it's kind of interesting, because again, love and romance, we a lot of us, we want to believe in these types of ideas and concepts of like love and romance and etc. and two people feel strongly towards each other and they come together and live happily ever after. A lot of us, we want to believe in this, but if you look at like specifically the divorce statistics, isn't why is it that initially two people, they feel strongly about each other and they come together, but then over time they start to like feel resentful towards each other and hateful towards each other, and inevitably they break up or they divorce or whatever, and they go their separate ways. Why is it? It's because love and romance, a lot of us human beings, we don't really understand what romance and love is. We don't understand like where these types of things come from. We don't understand like the primal origin that these things like love, romance, these feelings of attachment, attraction, sentiments, and etc. and stuff, all of this is like so primal and primitive. It relates to like such a primal, primitive part of our brain. It relates to like this type of evolutionary mechanism that helps facilitate reproduction and the survival of our species. But is love and romance, is it is love and romance actually all just bullshit, or is it like, or is there like some truth, or is there like some truth to it? I don't know. These are all bullshit. I do believe at least these are just my opinions. I do believe love and romance. I do believe it's kind of a little bit bullshit. I do, again, it's just love initially, not initially, but scientifically, what is like love and romance? It is sort of, it's just like chemicals in the brain. It sort of is like a chemical reaction that compels animals to breed, which is so edgy for me to say that. It's so like, because science is like so dehumanizing, isn't it? Like science is so like dehumanizing. It kind of takes away a lot of like the mystery of our species and stuff, and the mystery of like these types of things like love and romance. It takes the mystery away. But if you want to be very scientific and objective, it basically is just chemicals in the brain. It is like sort of like this type of evolutionary mechanism that helps facilitate like our reproduction. Romance. Anyway, the topic of this video is romance. Romance is like so. Oh look, I see a plane, man. Fuck it. Oh. Whoa, man, see that plane? I always see them up in the sky. Love and, I mean not love, but romance. Romance is so interesting. A lot of our history revolves around like romance, sort of, to some extent. Again, Suleiman the Magnificent, Roxolana. If you look at like India, the Taj Mahal, that was created to like kind of to honor like the wife of like one of the Mughal emperors, Shah Jahan. He wanted to create like this type of monument to honor his wife. Love and romance kind of does kind of relate to like a lot of our history. Romance is like so like important for us human beings. A lot of our history has kind of like revolved around these types of concepts and understandings of like romance and love and etc. and whatever. But still, just like, you know, Rick and Morty, what did Rick say, that old scientist geezer guy? He said that love is just a chemical reaction that compels animals to breed. Love, romance, these types of things. I do believe it just kind of relates to like such a primal, primitive part of our brain and etc. and stuff like that. I do believe it's kind of like relates to like such a primitive, like primal part of our brain. Primitive, like very primal part of our brain. Love and like romance and love and etc. These types of like feelings and emotions and sentiments and attraction, all of that is kind of like very primitive and primal in origin. It's sort of like an evolutionary mechanism to help facilitate reproduction. I do believe that to such a massive extent. But still, look at these, like, I do believe also that like Hollywood and Disney and all these like cartoon shows and movies and media and etc. that has like heavily like corrupted our proper understanding of love and romance, etc. Because you look at them, like especially in the medieval period, a little bit in the past as well, there was no such thing as like love and romance. People like, they were like arranged marriage. That was like arranged marriages. People would just like couple up according to like their tribal elders and maybe other types of authority figures. They would just couple up according to them and they would just stay together forever. Even if they hated each other, they would stay together. That's what was kind of like typical of our ancestors. Now we have like love and romance. You have to get with someone that you really feel strongly about and live happily ever after. Do you understand how brand new this type of idea and understanding is? If you look at the past, the medieval period, and even a little bit further back, love and romance, there was no such thing as love and romance. It was all just about like arranged marriages. You have to get with someone that your elders deem appropriate. You have to get with someone that your parents find appropriate, and you have to stay together for like financial, economic, and political reasons and stuff. That was typically like what marriages were about and stuff like that. Now we have like love and romance. I do believe maybe perhaps love and romance, maybe it came like a little bit after the medieval period, maybe perhaps in the early 18th, 17th, 18th, 19th centuries. That's when we start to get these types of understandings and conceptions and stuff like that, and ideas of like love and romance. And how we're so like lost as human beings. A lot of us, we're so lost. We have like such horrible like understandings and conceptions and like ideas of like what does love and romance, what do these things actually mean? Because if we go deeper into our history, it was like all about like political, economic, financial reasons. That's why people would get together in arranged marriages. It wasn't about like feelings of love and attraction and romance and you're like I'm your Romeo and you're my Juliet. It wasn't about any of this. If you go deeper into our history, love it, like especially like love and romance, it was all about like financial, political, fucking those types of like very practical like reasons to like get with someone and to stay in a marriage. Now it's all about like you have to get with someone if you feel strongly towards that person. It's so dumb shit. But anyway, overall, still, the topic of this video is romance. Romance, again, it's sort of like these. Well, what does the word romance mean? It's basically like these feelings of sentiments. You feel very sentimental about someone. You feel like very attracted, attached to someone, etc. Someone or something, maybe, perhaps, I don't know. It's such a primitive thing, in my opinion, like romance and love. It's these types of feelings and emotions and sentiments. It all relates to like such a primitive, primal part of our brain. This primitive, primal part of our brain. Basically, romance, love. It's like it basically is just an evolutionary mechanism to help facilitate reproduction. I do believe that, just like what Rick and Morty, that old scientist geezer guy, he said that love is basically just a chemical reaction that compels animals to breed. I believe in that to such a massive extent. Love is so primitive, it's so primal, it's so like, I don't believe it's even real. That's why so many people get divorced and there's so many breakups. Again, like, just like love is a chemical reaction that compels animals to breed. Initially you might find someone that you like and you get with them and you have these strong feelings of like attraction and attachment and sentiments, but inevitably you start to like drift away and you inevitably experience a breakup or a divorce. That's why I believe that love and romance, it sort of is just an illusion. I do believe it's like an illusion, a delusion. It's not like real in any meaningful way. It's sort of just like, again, relates to like a primitive, primal part of our brain. All about like, love is romance is sort of just like it's an evolutionary mechanism to facilitate reproduction. I do believe in that to such a massive extent. I do believe that love and romance is sort of just all like fantasy and fairy tales. Romeo, Juliet, live, princess, like what was it? Princess, like I fucking forgot what the fuck. Princess Sleeping Beauty. I fucking forgot. How the fuck did I forget all these like Disney things and these important Disney references? I do love Disney, by the way. I'm such a massive like I was thinking about getting like a Mickey Mouse teddy bear. I don't know, just to make my room a little bit more comfier. I don't know, but still, I do enjoy Disney. I do enjoy like a lot of the Disney movies. Tangled, I used to watch them when I was a lot younger. But these Disney, like all these Disney movies and cartoons, they give you these horrible like understandings of like what love and romance actually is and stuff. They give you fucking hell, shit, fucking fly, man, shit. They give you like, Disney kind of heavily corrupts, not just Disney but Hollywood, all of these like pop culture things. It just kind of heavily like taint our proper understandings of romance and love. Romeo, Juliet, you find someone you like and you live happily ever after. That it's like so delusional and fantasy. That's like delusional and fantasy and etc. It's kind of bullshit. Overall, look at divorce statistics. People break up again. If you look deeper into our history, marriage was all about like people coming together. That was usually typically due to political, financial reasons, not just because two people love each other very much and they want to live happily ever after. That's like such a brand new idea. That's really only a European thing, isn't it? It was only in the 19th century, earlier, maybe perhaps a little later back in the couple earlier centuries in Europe. That was like where these understandings and ideas of romance came from. In the rest of the world, it was all about financial or political reasons for someone to get together. Anyway, but still, romance, love, you have to understand that these types of feelings, sentiments, feelings of attraction, feelings of like attraction, sentiments, attachment as well, all of these feelings and emotions, they relate to such a primitive, primal part of our brain. They relate to like such a primitive part of our brain, and it's sort of, love is just sort of is a chemical reaction that compels animals to breed. I believe in that to such a massive extent. I believe that love is sort of just like an evolutionary, it relates to like, it's such an is like an evolutionary mechanism to help facilitate reproduction. I believe in that to such a massive extent. It's an evolutionary mechanism to help facilitate reproduction. I believe in that to such a massive extent. Although I do believe that sometimes people, like, they love each other very much and they get together and they live happily ever after and they don't divorce or break up. Sometimes but that only describes like such a small percentage of people. I do believe breakups and divorce, that's far more common, and because of that, I do believe that love and romance is sort of just delusions and fantasy to some extent. Although I do believe that sometimes people can feel very strongly towards each other and they come together and they live happily ever after, Romeo Juliet. I do believe in that to some extent. You know, Disney movies, cartoons, like a lot of these like understandings like romance and love, it does come from Disney and like these other like movies and cartoons similar to Disney and etc. and stuff. Disney, man, I fucking fuck with Disney, like Romeo Juliet, all that type of shit. You know, you should know about that, man. I fucking used to watch those Disney movies when I was a lot younger anyway. But Disney, man, these types of ideas and stuff like that it does come from Disney and like all these Hollywood things and stuff. Anyway, but back to the topic of this video. The topic of this video is romance. Romance, I do believe it relates to such a primitive, tribal part of our brain. Primitive part of our brain. Love is like an evolutionary mechanism to help facilitate reproduction. Oh, my GoPro Hero 9 got too hot and it quickly turned off. Anyway, love basically is just like love and romance is an evolutionary mechanism to help facilitate reproduction and stuff. Love is like a chemical reaction that helps love is just a chemical reaction that compels animals to breed, etc. Just like what Rick said. Anyway, I don't want this video to be too long, and that's about it. Romance and love is sort of like it's so primitive and kind of sort of like, yeah, it's very primitive, archaic, primal, all to do with like all these like evolutionary mechanisms in our brain that relate to reproduction and the survival of the species, etc. But still, it feels good to like at least believe that there is such a thing as romance and love, and that these things are actually true and real and they exist. Even though I do believe that it's probably just all like chemicals and like primitive like parts of our brain operating, etc. Not really anything profound. Although you can still like, you can believe in whatever you want. If you want to believe that romance and love is real, you can believe in that. Anyway, I don't want this video to be too long, and that's about it.